Hello, everybody. My name's Jim, and this is a spoiler free review of Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black. With all due respect to Daniel Black, I know that this title is Don't Cry for Me, but I admit I teared up a number of times while reading this novel. It is a series of letters from a dying black man to his gay son. The two have an estranged relationship due to a history of abuse and ill feelings. And we'll get into the letters in one of the sections in this review. But first, I wanted to direct your attention to Shelbey and the Book Club, who did a review for this novel last year. Shortly after, I believe it was released. I also read this last year in March. Her review covers so much about the novel without spoiling any of it. A lot of things that she talks about are things that I don't feel qualified to bring up. So I would love for you guys to go watch her review of the book. She also had this on her list of novels to read during Black History Month. And since we're a little over halfway through with the month, get on the ball, read this book. It's definitely worth it. And while I was watching her video, I was waiting for this because I believe this novel is what turned her into a Daniel Black fan. I think that's even what she titled the video of her review. So check her channel out, check her review out. She goes into so much detail about important messages in this book about growing up black and having that experience. So yeah, do check her videos out. And if you feel like you want to know more about the novel, you can come back to mine. But she does a great job of breaking down the novel, and I do want to just give her a little bit more focus because I am not going to talk about the things that she talked about necessarily, at least not in the same amount of depth that she spoke about it. So go check out Shelbey. She's really cool. I want to dip into Daniel Black's history a little bit. I know it's kind of odd to talk about the author, but Daniel Black's history, either he was or he is an African American studies professor. And when you read the novel, I do want you to keep that in mind because so much of the novel emphasized history and where the black community came from, how certain values were instilled. A lot of it felt like lessons, but in a good way. I don't think that he ever broke Jacob's character. And the cool thing about writing each chapter as a letter is I think you could get away with that a little bit easier because Jacob was teaching his son. Jacob was teaching his son his history. Jacob was making sure that Isaac understood this is where we came from. This is why we believe the things that we believe. It's so hard when you talk about this sort of thing and you talk about identity because in a lot of ways it really was a case of stolen identity. You were forced to, I know a lot of people use the term assimilate, but that's really what happened. You just had to assimilate as a means of survival, as a means of, not being treated differently. And unfortunately, that sort of thing still happens today. And I think that a lot of that was highlighted in this novel. And before anybody listening to this is like, that doesn't sound like a book for me, I think it is. I really think it is. I think it's a book for anybody. And I understand that, by me reviewing this novel, it could spark a little bit of controversy because, I could go into politics a little bit. But I do think it's important to learn these things, especially from a black author, especially someone who is in the education field. Like Daniel Black is an educator, he knows his stuff. I would pick this book up for that reason if you're just curious to know. It is a gut punch. Like every single letter almost is a punch to the gut. It's just so important. And I really appreciate Daniel Black for his insightful writing while also still making this novel very compelling and very gut-wrenching. He has done a phenomenal job. This was one of my favorite books of last year. I absolutely do recommend this book before getting into any of the, actual review. So as I mentioned before, the chapters are broken up into letters to Jacob's son Isaac. They are extremely easy to digest, and they are sort of like small vignettes into Jacob's past. He talks about, growing up with his grandparents because he didn't have a mother and a father readily available to him. He spoke about, his marriage. He spoke about so many things that honestly need a little bit more detail to explain, but each chapter was a letter. It wasn't super connected and chronological, but it also makes sense because, you don't really think of writing a full story from front to back. When you're writing letters, there are some things that you remember that you want to talk about, and you mentioned that and it really worked for this novel. Like I said before, I don't know Daniel Black's original style, but I think that this was so unique and so appropriate for the book that he was writing, for a dying man to write letters to his son. And it really is up to you to interpret whether or not these letters kind of culminate into an apology or if these are just reflections. One thing I will say, though, is that I didn't ever get the feeling that him going through his past, his rough history, the abuse that he endured, I never saw it as an excuse for his homophobia and his misogyny. I think that when it comes to ignorant behavior like that, people who feel that way are always unlearning it. They always need to be put in a position to unlearn it, or else they're just going to be that for the rest of his life. And I feel like his letters are him in the process of unlearning. He's in the process of figuring things out. And unfortunately, because he doesn't have much time left on the earth, personally, I feel like it's too little too late. Thinking about Isaac, because we never really get into his perspective, but I thought about, him receiving the letters. What was going through his mind? What was he thinking? And kind of applying it to myself, if I were in his position, would I even expect an apology at this point? Probably not. The relationship is so far detached at this point, and it feels like Jacob is reaching out to him kind of at the last minute. I don't know if Jacob tried to reach out to him anytime before, but like I said, it's a little too little. It's too little, too late. Still, I do try to think about Isaac's response, and I know that for me personally, the people who did me harm growing up were not my parents. They're people who, honestly, if I never saw them again, it wouldn't matter. But I can't imagine how hard it would be to break up from your parents, your family. So that is that is an experience that fortunately I never will have to go through. And I honestly can't imagine him having to go through that. And I do wonder, kind of going back to Daniel Black, I wonder how much of this experience was his own, because I know that he is also a gay man. God, I really want to get into spoilers about this, but I can't because I told myself it would be spoiler free. But there's one character that I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. I'll skip it. But anyway, the letters, they're great. And yeah, I don't know what's going through Isaac's mind when he receives the letters. But it would be curious. It would be interesting to know as he's receiving them. Is he really taking it in? Is he feeling it in his heart? How does he interpret the letters, basically? And we may never know. That's why, it's up to us to kind of interpret, like, is this what Jacob means? And kind of dipping into the LGBT and gay men, this story covers so many different issues that society has. Like I said before, it is homophobia, it is misogyny, it is racism, it it is everything. That it just comes with a big content warning, I guess, for everyone who wants to read this novel. But where manhood is concerned, so much of that with Jacob is challenged, with a wife who is smarter than he is, with a gay son who exhibits behaviors that Jacob does not deem masculine. You know, Isaac is much more of a creative type. He plays piano. He's artistic. He participates in school plays, and he does all of these things that Jacob feels is lesser than a man, basically. Isaac's mother supports him so much throughout the novel, and it's kind of, in a way, you see the contrast between her and Jacob, and some of it, I guess, maybe could be just the fact that she is more well read. You know, she reads all the time, and she is well educated, that she's able to understand a little bit more. And I don't want to get into spoilers with the with the mother son relationship, but yeah. So it is this contrast between someone who doesn't understand and someone who just wants Isaac to do what he loves, and there's a bit of a clash there as well. But so much of Jacob's manhood was forced on him by his grandfather, or at least his ideas of what a man actually is. So again, with all of this behavior that needs to be unlearned when it comes to how he treats women, how he treats the LGBT, he also has to unlearn what it means to be a man, and has to figure out how to feel without feeling emasculated. There are so many times in this novel, and this isn't much of a story because it is about abuse, when Jacob is unable to feel other emotions like sadness or confusion or frustration, he manifests it into anger. And when it becomes anger, he lashes out. That is such a destructive behavior. And I can't help but feel that there are still some men who are simply unable to let emotions out before it becomes that bottled up toxic energy that is eventually unleashed on people who don't deserve it, frankly. I think today we are still redefining what it's like to be a man, and for me personally, I don't think it needs to have a definition. I think that we as people just need to be good people, and we need to feel, and we need to empathize. I don't think that manhood needs to fit into a specific bucket. And, you know, I did warn you guys that I would get into politics a little bit, but I really can't help it because this just opened my eyes to so much. And I see it around me all the time. It's just, you know, these barriers are still being torn down today, and you could see a lot of that being torn down in this novel, or at least maybe not being torn down, but at least being reflected upon in Jacob's letters. And I think that's really important. So there are some things that happened in the book that are outside the LGBT lens. Um, it happened within the Black community, and you know, a lot of it made me go back and research certain things, because there are events and laws in the background of Jacob's past, and in the background of this novel, that Daniel Black didn't necessarily write about, that I felt still affected what happened in the novel. And a good example of that was when a character was sick. They were paid a visit by the doctor, and the doctor really didn't seem to do that much. He was just like, you know, make sure that this character rests, make sure that you're keeping an eye on them. And so, at first I was like, oh, okay, okay, okay. But then he kept doing it, and the illness was not improving. And, it made me think about these laws that were enforced to the detriment of the black community. And I'm specifically talking about the Jim Crow laws, where black people, and the law that I'm about to demonstrate is specifically about black men, but it prevented black people from receiving the care that they needed, or the medical care. And there's one law that comes into mind specifically, and this is just to kind of demonstrate just how outrageous they were. It was about white nurses being unable to treat black men because, for whatever reason, I know that this still happens today, but it's never going to make sense to me. It's just, for whatever reason, black men were seen as a danger to these white nurses. Like, what are they going to do? They're sick. You know what I mean? It's not, if anybody is in a hospital bed and they are knocking on death's door, they're not going to cop a field. They're not going to make a move. I don't understand what's the difference. And based on the novel itself, there were plenty of white guys who were misogynists too, and were perfectly capable of mistreating nurses, if they were to be in a hospital room together. So it just made no sense to me. But this was the sort of thing that, Jim Crow laws prevented. If a black man is sick, he can't be seen by a white nurse. So that healthcare is automatically extremely limited. And it just means that African Americans are more likely to not only worsen in health, but also pass away under the supposed care of the medical system. It makes no sense. So I was thinking about that sort of thing as I was reading the novel. Like, I was trying to recall, these are the things that I learned about, these are the things that I know. These are the background effects of what's happening to these characters in this novel that Daniel Black doesn't specifically write about. He doesn't, I don't think he brings up Jim Crow laws at all. But considering this is the stuff that was happening, I just think it is important to take that sort of thing into account, because by the time when Jacob was growing up, it was around the time, that the civil rights movement was new. It was just a whisper, basically. Laws had not been abolished. Things had not changed very much. And so, it was what it was back then. You have to think about some of those underlying effects that were taking place while Jacob was growing up to really understand what was happening. And I hope that I'm not wrong. It would be interesting to hear other people, talk about especially the doctor visit, but also other things that Daniel Black mentioned. I could go into more examples, but since that happened in the beginning, I don't think that is much of a spoiler. I would love to hear others' comments about that, and if they thought about it the same way. I would really like to talk to Shelbey and get her take on these things, but she's not gonna watch this video. It's fine. But yeah, so that stayed in my mind while I was reading the novel, because every time that he would mention something affecting Jacob that wasn't Jacob himself, creating the problem or acting on something, then I did have to kind of reflect a little bit and say, this was forced on him. He wasn't really able to make that choice. But yeah, it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to take in. Like I said, this book, the chapters are gut-wrenching, and if you're not ready to cry, if you're not ready to have your chest hurt, but also learn so much, then I wouldn't recommend reading this book now. But when you're ready for it, I absolutely recommend this novel to anyone who wants to read it, who wants to learn more. And again, I'm sorry for getting into politics a little bit, but the fact that this novel made me look deeper and think beyond the page is something that I think is very important that authors don't often achieve. And I needed to highlight that for this novel specifically just because of what an impact it made on me. Wow. uh some emotions started welling up a little bit. So I probably need to stop this video here, but as always, I've been Jim. You've been great. Thanks for watching.